Now, John Elliott, we've got to talk about John Elliott. He presided over the Federal Liberal Party and the Carlton Football Club. Sadly, he died in Melbourne last night at the age of 79. He was a larger-than-life character, enormously influential at the height of his powers. And joining us now is former Liberal Party president as well, Sky News regular Michael Kroger. Michael, so good to have you with us.
Hi, Rita.
Jack Elliott, he was one of a kind, wasn't he?
He sure was. He was very bright. He was very authentic. You know, what you saw, that was him. Chain smoking, hard drinking, ran at 1,000,000 miles an hour, possessed of tremendous self-confidence. He had some bright people around him, and in the early 70s, of course, he started a boom in business mergers and acquisitions and takeovers of poorly performing companies, and then rose to the position of federal president and president of the Carlton Football Club, and a very influential and powerful figure in Victoria. And he was very good to me in my early years as president. He supported me for the presidency in '87, and remained an influential figure. And great family members. Lorraine Elliott, his first wife, was vice president of the Liberal Party when I was president in the '80s, and she was an extraordinary woman. And of course, Amanda, who became chairman of the Victoria Racing Club. So a great family of kids around him, and a legendary figure. And it's been a sad period for the party. We've lost Andrew Peacock recently, and of course John Elliott, and in the last few weeks Julian Beale, a great former member for Bruce, also passed away. So it's been a pretty sad period in the Enigman era, unfortunately.
Michael, I completely agree with you. They don't make them like John Elliott anymore.
No.
One thing I've often puzzled about was how it was that John Elliott was never able to land a seat in Parliament, or even in Town Hall. He took a tilt at my job as Deputy Lord Mayor once upon a time, but for whatever reason, he never seemed to succeed electorally. How could it be that someone who was so successful in business, a titan of the sporting world as the president of Carlton Football Club, president of the Liberals nationally, but couldn't land a seat in Parliament? How do you explain that?
So John lacked a couple of things. He lacked patience and he lacked subtlety. And in politics, those two things are very, very important. And John had a tilt at Higgins in 1986, but again, it was a bit bullheaded because Roger Shipton had just been endorsed in 1985. John's people in Higgins came along and tried to sort of, reopen pre-selections and get rid of Roger Shipton to have a go at Higgins, but it'd just been re-endorsed. And I was actually at the meeting. I was vice chairman of Higgins, and I voted against reopening nominations because I said to John, you should have run a year ago when Roger was, up for re-election, up for re-endorsement, and you can't just sort of bulldoze into the party and, trample over convention. So he lacked a subtlety and he lacked an understanding of the intricacies of politics. And I think in the end, he probably would not have succeeded federally. I mean, you have to have patience. Look at the people who have succeeded federally. I mean, more recently, John Howard, Menzies. You need patience, and those people that haven't succeeded, like Rudd, who was always in a great hurry, et cetera, et cetera. So he lacked that, but, he had a brilliant career. He was a brilliant federal president with Ron Walker, the greatest fundraiser the Liberal Party's ever had. Without Elliott's fundraising with Ron Walker, we would have been in more serious trouble than we were in the late 80s. And, as I said in the Australian today, when the Liberal Party was looking for friends in the business community in the late 80s, early 90s, John Elliott put his head up. To his great pain, it caused him, measurable problems later on, taking on the Labor government so publicly. And, he said to me one stage, mate, after it was all over, he said, I realised politics and public business, being chairman of CEOs of public companies, don't mix. And I said, yeah, I think that's right, John. You can't do both. Not even he could do both.
Do you think with the environment we have now, so sanitised, so boring, that a character like Jack Elliott could come along and have the influence he did have in both football and in politics? We don't seem to have those colourful characters anymore.
We don't. It's more of the mundane, the person that can turn up to 100 press conferences in a row, day after day after day. No, politics is a very, in many respects, we're going through a reasonably pedestrian era in terms of, one foot in front of the other. Times change. I mean, when John Howard became leader again, he said the times suited him, and they did. So would the times suit John now? Probably not, but there would be a time when, with more patience and a bit more judgment, the times would suit John, which would be if the economy got into great crisis and they needed a strong figure that understood economics. That would be a time that would have suited John Elliott. But in further answer to Nick's question, you can't just say, I'm ready for a seat now, give me one. That can sometimes happen, but it is a bit like a roulette wheel. Sometimes you just have to wait for your number to come up. And when John wanted his number to come up, it just wasn't available for him.
And Michael, everyone's got a favourite John Elliott story. Is there one that stands out for you?
Well, Nick, he used to be so busy in those days. He'd fly in from, say, Hong Kong early one morning at 7 o'clock, and he'd have a shower and he'd front up to the Federal Executive meeting at 9 a.m, having had no sleep, having had no connection with Australian politics for a week or 2 weeks. And he was lucky he had a legendary former Fraser Peacock staffer, Alistair Drysdale, working for him, and Alistair would do him these beautiful notes. So John would rock into the Federal Executive meeting and he'd say, I want to welcome, Fred Nurk, the new Tasmanian president. Alistair written this note saying, Fred Nurk is the bloke with a red tie with a bald head in the left-hand corner. And John would look over and he'd say, Fred, it's fantastic to have you here. I know you're doing a fantastic job down there in Tasmania and the party's going well under your leadership. And John would extol Fred Nurk's virtues for 20 or 30 seconds, never having met Fred and never having clapped eyes on him. But Drysdale's notes were so good, we'd all leave the meeting thinking, God, Elliott's right. He's so well informed. He's just right. He must have read the papers, and he had no idea who Fred Nurk was. But Drysdale's notes were word perfect. And of course, Fred would go back to Tasmania and say, "Oh, John Elliott knows all about me. He knows all about Tasmania. We're famous up there on the mainland." So, anyway, many of them. But Elliott was a very, very charismatic figure in his day, and he was great. As people said, he was equally as home at the Melbourne Cup with Princess Diana and Prince Charles, and he was equally, home in a pub in Canberra having a beer with people. And as you said, they don't make them like John Elliott anymore. And a great life, a great career, and another grand figure in Australian life who'll be very sadly missed.